Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Maria Wich-Vila, and today's session, we are going to be talking about, I'm pulling up my slides. We are going to be talking about what is it that admissions committees are looking for. So if you are just starting your kind of admissions, your admissions process, you might be wondering like, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that I need to clearly be, let me see. Is it sharing? Can someone just quickly put in the comment? Oh, there we go. Sorry, it wasn't moving, but now it's moving. Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure that I don't. I have done in the past where I have just taken off with my presentation talking a million miles a minute, and like several minutes in, I realized that none of my slides have been showing. So I just wanted to make sure. Cool. Anyway, so if you're just starting your MBA journey, you're probably like, oh my gosh, I'm just starting to look into what I need to apply. And there's so many different pieces, and I don't know what to do. And what do I prioritize? And where am I even going to talk about all the different things? So, what I'm going to walk you guys through today is I'm going to talk to you about what is it that admissions committees are really looking for. And then where in your application are you going to show them that you've got those things that they are looking for? So, when you ask an admissions officer, when you go to any sort of website for a top MBA program, and they will usually have little things in the admissions section that's like, here's what are we looking for. The official story usually sounds a little something like this. We use a multifaceted, holistic review process to try to find future leaders who are going to benefit the world. And you're going to see this word popping up a lot, the word holistic. And if you're anything like me, when you first encounter this word, you might be thinking like, what does that even mean? And I think one of the best ways to think about what does holistic even mean is it really does mean that it is a multifaceted thing. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit later is I'm going to dig into some of those facets. And I'm actually going to make the point that not all of those facets are created equal. They're not all looked at the same time or with the same weight. But basically, unlike some other schools that you might have applied to in the past, where, say, a test score or your grades were the primary factor that got you in, business school application and business school admissions is completely different. It really does look at a lot of different factors. It does not depend on just one thing. And in fact, if in one of those factors you are perhaps underperforming a little, or you've got a bit of a weakness over here or over there, the good news is that this holistic process means that you can balance out some of those positive aspects with more negative. Wait, what? You could balance out some of those more negative aspects with more positive aspects. You could try to balance out positive aspects with negative, but that would not make any sense. So, just to be clear, because as you start digging into this process, you're going to realize, like, oh my gosh, I have to do so many things. I have to submit a resume and write essays and all this stuff. Well, the reason the admissions officers make you do that is because since they are looking for multifaceted aspects of you, that's why the application itself is very multifaceted. When they ask you for the resumes and the essays and they invite you to interview, they're not just doing this because these are people who need better hobbies, right? They're not just bored and they're like, oh, what should I do today? I don't know. Let me read a bunch of essays that I don't mean anything. No, the reason they ask for this stuff is because they're trying to get at something. They're trying to learn things about you that cannot be simply you summarize in a couple of sentences. So they're asking for lots of stuff because they're looking for lots of stuff. And this, by the way, is why if you go to one of these websites and you see these, these quick profile reviews, hey, I've got a 720 GMAT and I've got 5 years of work experience and my favorite color is green and I love the Mission Impossible movies, like whatever it is that people put in these profiles, it's a complete waste of time, for the most part, only because once you get beyond some very egregious, like if somebody says, well, I've got a negative 200 on the GMAT, then you say, well, okay, that's probably a pretty good sign that you need to reshift your priorities a little. But for the most part, once we get to someone who is within the right range, right, they've got a pretty good GMAT, what seems to be at face value, pretty good work experience. Beyond that, a profile review is not going to really do a whole lot, because if the process were so easy that all it took were a profile review's worth of information about someone to make that decision, the admissions officers would not make themselves work so hard. Right? The application itself would consist of 3 sentences, and deciding whether or not to admit someone would consist of 3 seconds of just scanning. So hopefully the fact that the application process itself is so involved is the first evidence that they really mean it when they say that this is a holistic process. So when we think about what are they looking for, what are they really looking for anyway when they talk about things that are holistic? So, one of the things that I really want to try to get into your head with today's session is that when admissions officers are looking at your profile today, business schools in general, as institutions, have a very long time horizon, right? Business schools have been around for decades, in some cases, 100 years or more. So, they are looking for what might our alumni base look like 20 to 30 years from now. So a lot of times people say like, okay, Maria, I'm like this random person and I'm applying to this school. So what do I need to do to get in? It's not so much about just sort of taking a random person and slapping on this amazing application. It's about finding the type of person that 20 to 30 years from now, that's their ultimate mandate. The ultimate mandate is you need to find people who will eventually go on to make the school proud. So here's an example. Um, I pulled up this Forbes profile on Jamie Dimon. For those of you who don't know, he is the CEO of JP Morgan. And so here's this kind of like little Forbes, like, who's Jamie Dimon? Here's our profile of him. And literally the third point made about him in this profile is, whoop, he went to Harvard Business School. Now, he's done a whole lot of other things. And of all the things he's done, attending Harvard Business School is probably not the most impressive thing he's done. And yet, when the press writes about him, one of the first things they're going to talk about is, well, Harvard Business School. And so the schools want to try to pick people who are going to go on to become like sort of famous for all the right reasons. And therefore, when the press or journalists write about that school and they mention in the same breath or in the same paragraph, like Harvard Business School grad Jamie Dimon, that helps the business school with its brand. And when a school's got a great brand, it attracts better applicants, it attracts better recruiters, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like this sort of circle of life of positivity. And by the way, like whenever something negative happens, right? Like Elizabeth Holmes recently had to show up for prison. There, look at the articles about her and how many of them will say like this Stanford dropout, the Stanford woman, so the schools know that when they let you in, for better or worse, their name will be associated with you potentially for the rest of your life. So they are looking for people who 30 years from now are going to become the next Jamie Dimons of the world. And they want these people to be positive. So here's Mike Bloomberg. And Mike Bloomberg is not only a zillionaire, but he's given money to universities and art museums and all these museums. In fact, it's interesting. Coincidentally, I had already made this slide. I'm in New York right now on vacation, and I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art yesterday, and I'm walking around, and it's like this room full of like armor and ancient weaponry, and it's like, oh, it's the Bloomberg whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, Mike Bloomberg, you're everywhere. So over his lifetime, Mike Bloomberg has given $11 billion to philanthropy. So these are the sorts of graduates that the top business schools are hoping to accept. And at this point, you might be thinking, cool. This is exactly why I need the MBA, Maria. Like, I need to get that MBA so that I can become one of these awesome people who goes on to do awesome things. The MBA is going to be the thing that transforms me into this magical person. That's not at all how this works. Sorry to burst your bubble. I like to often quip, it's Harvard, not Hogwarts, right? It's not some sort of magic school where there's like someone with like a magic hat and they put the magic hat on you and they wave a wand and poof, you are the next hedge fund billionaire. Poof, you are the next nonprofit CEO that motivates the world and inspires everyone. That's not how this works. And by the way, I have a little asterisk here, like it's Harvard or any other business school. I like the alliteration of it all. That's why I keep it that way. But really, any business school is a business school, but it's not magic school. So they can't take someone who has never accomplished anything, who has never raised their hand to show any initiative, who has never really helped a team accomplish it. They haven't accomplished much. They haven't helped other people accomplish much. A business school is not going to take someone like that and fundamentally change the nature of their DNA and transform them suddenly into this princess, sort of magical fairy tale princess of the business world. So I want to make sure that you don't get your causality twisted. And a great example of this recently, if you have not yet seen this movie, I love this movie. It's called Air. I think it's on Amazon Prime. It should be all over the world, I believe. It's about the story of the Nike executive that convinced Michael Jordan to lend his name and to be the endorser for the Air Jordan shoe. And there's a great line in there where this Nike executive says, "A shoe's just a shoe." And then Michael Jordan's mother says, "Until my son steps into it." And when you think about it, that's kind of what a business school is. A school is just a school, but what transforms a school and what elevates its brand and its reputation are the people that it lets in. So the more elite the school is, the higher that bar is. They're looking for the raw talent, right? There's this great scene where I mean, and it's based on a true story, but this part might be a little fictitious. Where this Nike executive is watching this video of Michael Jordan play in a basketball game, and he sees something that no one else has seen in Michael Jordan, like in his sort of countenance and how he holds himself. And he's like, oh my gosh, this guy is not yet a superstar, but he is going to become a superstar. And that's kind of what business schools are doing when they're looking at your application. And so if you're saying, well, one of the things that I often find is interesting is that people will sort of, people bucket the schools into eliteness buckets, right? So there's like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and then there's like the other top 5, top 7, M7, top 10, top 15, whatever. As you start sort of moving around the buckets, if you look at things like the average GMAT scores, for example, they're kind of similar, right? Like, oh, 737 versus 730. Like, from a percentile basis, it's negligible. There's essentially a negligible difference. And yet, some of these schools are almost impossible to get into, and some of them are easier to get into. And what makes the difference? What makes the difference is that some of the schools are really looking for the next Michael Jordan. And some of the schools are looking for players who are going to be amazing players, who are going to go on to do like incredible things and change the game and be amazing teammates, but maybe they're not quite looking for that, that one needle in the haystack quite as much. Maybe they're looking for several needles in the haystack. And so that's really what starts to separate out the elite program acceptances from some of the other ones. So when you think about that, that's when the admissions officer is looking and saying, okay, who within this applicant pool is most likely to become an impactful leader? And it doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be, right? Because people can make impact in all kinds of different ways. But given what we know about them so far, who is most likely to go on to become that impactful leader? So people have already started doing things. And hopefully this might be like good news for some of you, but not so good news for others. But if you're the sort of person who has already started in your life to accomplish things and to volunteer to do cool things or to be like a really great person at work that everyone likes and gets along with, that's a sign to them. Okay, past is a good indicator of future. People who have already done great things are more likely to continue to do great things in the future. So I have this concept that I use called the ADCOM hierarchy of needs. And so what I'm going to talk to you about here is, first of all, this hierarchy of needs contains those holistic elements. But instead of showing them as kind of like this blob of holisticness, I actually rank them. And I go from bottom to top in terms of importance. And the idea being that if you're sort of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the admissions officer, within what they're looking for, that bottom level has to be crossed before then you can move on to the next level of consideration. And that level needs to be crossed before you then move on to the next level of consideration. And then that very tippy top here, the apex of our little hierarchy of needs is the leadership potential. So where in the application are you going to show them that you meet all of these different needs? Well, the easiest one is the academics. This is basically going to be through your GMAT/GRE. It's true that GPA matters, but I don't believe that GPA matters as much as people think it does. Because to be honest with you, GPAs from school to school or even from major to major can differ completely, right? So if you had to get a heart transplant and one of the doctors went to like the best medical school in your country or in the world, and maybe they had a 3.4 GPA, but someone else has a 4.0 perfect GPA or a 10 out of 10 GPA or whatever metric you're using. If someone's got a perfect GPA from a medical school where it's like, well, it was all done online and it's not accredited and it's a medical school from somewhere like in the Bahamas or some sort of tax aid, right? Like, aren't you, I don't know about you, but I would rather have the person who went to the best medical school, even if maybe they didn't get perfect grades. I'd rather have that person operate on me than the person with perfect grades but who went to like maybe a school that isn't as good, or maybe I don't know, like, oh well, I majored in basket weaving, and you're like, okay, well that's not very helpful for my heart, but great to know. So this is why when people put the test score and the GPA side by side in their profile reviews, please realize that they're going to look at not just the number of your GPA. They're going to actually dig into your transcript and see like which university did you go to, which classes did you take, where, what grades did you get in which classes, et cetera, because they're trying to get a sense of, can you handle the academics at my program? Or are you going to struggle? Because that's the worst thing ever, right? I would hate for you to go through this whole process and then you show up to a school and the workload is crushing and you get depressed and like no, and then you drop out, and then it's a terrible reaction. That's a terrible result, sorry, for anyone. So just realize the first level is going to be that GMAT/GRE. It does matter more than your GPA, in my opinion. Now, the good news is the test score is the element that is the most under your control right now, right? Your GPA is probably something you did in the past. All else being equal, I was actually on a session a couple of days ago, and one of the questions that came at the last minute that we didn't get to answer was somebody asked, "Well, what's better, a strong GMAT score or a strong GRE score?" My opinion is that all else being equal, a strong GMAT score is better because it is still the gold standard for business school acceptances. If you are interested in getting a scholarship, I do believe that higher GMAT scores, scholarship money tends to get thrown at higher GMAT scores more than it tends to get thrown at high GRE scores. But by the way, if you've been prepping for the tests and you're like, oh my gosh, I've taken a zillion practice tests and it's just not working out, and you've done a zillion GMAT practice tests, then do consider switching to the GRE. I have a whole blog post about why I believe the GRE is more quote unquote forgivable in the application process. So if standardized test taking just isn't your jam, maybe consider looking to the GRE, because I'd rather have you get accepted. If you're like, oh, but Maria, if I use the GRE, then I might not be as likely to get a scholarship. Maybe I don't care. My job is to help you get accepted. Like once you get accepted, then you can figure out the financial aspects of it. And by the way, that usually means taking out a really big loan. Even people who get scholarships often have to take out some sort of a loan as well. So you know, loans are going to be in your future either way. So just my whole thing is if the GMAT score is going to keep you out, then focus on the GRE score, which has a better chance of helping you get in. Now, you might have heard the term in the past, necessary but not sufficient. So, strong academics are necessary to get accepted, but they are not even remotely in your wildest dreams in any alternate universe the only thing you need to get accepted. So yes, low academic profile can keep you out. If I'm worried that you're going to flounder in my program and, oh my gosh, you're going to struggle and you're going to drop out because it's too stressful, then yeah, I'm probably not going to let you in. Um, but to be clear, strong academics by themselves are just the bottom, that first step in the pyramid. It's not enough by itself to get you accepted. Okay, because again, it is in fact a holistic process. That's what we're talking about here today. All right, so moving up the hierarchy of needs, do you have EQ, which is another way of saying emotional intelligence? Are you someone who essentially gets along with other people? Can you work well with others? Can you work well with teams? Or does everyone hate you? Um, and you might think to yourself, well, why does it matter how likable I am? Well, because honestly, the world is getting smaller in general. And no matter who you are or where you want to go or what impact you want to make in this world, there's a really good chance you're going to need other people to go along with you, whether it's coworkers on a team, whether it's customers or investors, or maybe you're selling something to a business partner. You're going to need other people to get along with you, and especially because now that we're in such this interconnected online world, I like to quip that bad reputations can travel at the speed of internet. So let's say you've got this one business partner and hey, you kind of screw them over. Wah, and you think, well, no one's ever going to know. Well, it's a lot, maybe 50 years ago, if you were in your little small hometown and you screwed over a local business partner, no one else would ever know. But nowadays it's getting harder and harder. And so this ability to work with others is vital. There's no company that's just one person by themselves. So here is where in your application you show it, right? That first tier, that first level of the pyramid, you show it through your GMAT or GRE score. This next tier, you're going to mostly show it via external evidence. You can't really say, it would be kind of weird or awkward in your application to say out loud something like, I've got really strong EQ, you guys. I'm super likable. Who's got two thumbs and everyone love? It's this girl. Like you, right? That would be super weird. You're not going to do that. But so here's where you're going to prove that you have this. Um, One of the biggest places you can do this is through your recommendations. So when you go to your recommender and you start to ask them and start to work with them, like, okay, what is it that you're going to say about me? And by the way, in Applicant Lab, I've got a whole recommendation module that helps you figure out like how to approach your recommender, et cetera. So in case you're like, what is she talking about? This is panicking me. Don't panic. I can help you. But so when you go to your recommenders, you're going to want to ask them to emphasize things like how well you get along with others, how good you are on teams, how others look to you for help and support. Things like that that show that you're a good person because you can't say it about yourself, but your recommender can say anything they want about you. So if they say it, it's not awkward if it's coming from them. Another place you can show this is if part of your job has involved building out an internal team or let's say getting a team to work together better that hasn't been working together well, uh, highlight that on the resume, sort of make that part of the bullet point on the resume. Make sure that you don't get too lost. If you've already seen some of my resume webinars, don't get too lost in the technical details of the PHP and the SQL server and the whatever. That stuff is not as important. But if it's part of a project, you helped convince an external partner to spend more money, or you convinced a client to not leave, or you convinced an internal product manager to take your idea, all those sorts of things, make sure to mention that in the resume as part of how you achieved a certain bullet point. That I do want you to emphasize much more than any sort of technical or IQ brainiac knowledge. So by the way, speaking about this like is EQ thing, hopefully now that we started talking about the hierarchy of needs a little and what they're looking for, here's a little side note. If you're ever on these message boards like GMAT Club and you see someone post something that they're like, oh, I have a 780 GMAT, I have a perfect GPA and a perfect GMAT, and I was rejected everywhere. Wow, and it's life's so unfair, and they're unfair, and everything's unfair. So a couple of things. First of all, now that you've attended this session, now you know, something higher up in that hierarchy must have done you in there, buddy, because you clearly passed that first level. Flying colors, right? Amazing. But there must have been some other stuff further up that pyramid that did you in. And what I think is the reason I'm mentioning this right here during my talk about EQ is that there's kind of like this matrixy, self-fulfilling prophecy, circular reference type of thing going on where it's like if somebody ever posts something like that, if they assume that they are entitled to get into a business school simply because they have a high test score, first of all, if you assume that you're entitled to get into any school for any reason, that's not great. But especially the people who are like, "Oh, I had this amazing GMAT, and I didn't get in." And in fact, the very fact that someone is posting something like that only proves that the admissions committee made the right choice in rejecting them because that assumption and that sort of like, oh, I deserve to get in and they don't know what they're talking about, like, oh my gosh, that's very immature, that's very self-centered. Those are all those things that are not good EQ. You are showing that you do not have good EQ by posting these things. So not to get all matrixy on you, whoa, but just something to keep in mind for the future as you go through this journey. So then moving on, they start to think about like, okay, can somebody get and keep a job after business school? Or is this someone that we are going to send out into the world with our school name attached to them for the rest of their lives and they're just going to embarrass us? Right? Because if you've ever had an experience where you've met someone from a program, from a certain MBA program or any program really, and they like, they act in a way that's off putting or like, oh, they can't hold down a job or oh, they keep getting fired, that starts to drag the school's name down with it. Right? So your career success in the past is a big indicator of your potential career success in the future. So the best way, I mean, I hate to say this, but, like, sometimes people are like, "Oh, well, that's not fair." But it kind of is because, like, I don't know, it's business school, and they're looking to train people to go into business or other organizations in the case of, say, a nonprofit. And so you still need to be able to do stuff successfully in a professional setting. It's not just about, "Oh, well, Maria, I have really good ideas." Okay, great, but did anyone listen to your ideas? Did anyone follow your ideas when you had them? Well, no. Okay. If you just wanna sit around and think deep thoughts about management and business, great. That's what the PhD is for. But the MBA is a very practical, pragmatic, hands-on degree. It's a professional degree. And because it's a professional degree, they're looking for people who are going to have professional success, and therefore people who have had professional success in the past. Because in the short term, they want to make sure that when their corporate recruiters come to campus and they wine and dine the students and they rent out the interview room and they spend all this, that they're going to be happy. That the corporate recruiters are going to say, wow, you guys, you did a great job. You put some amazing candidates in front of us. We are going to hire so many Ross students right now. You don't even know. We love these people that we met today, right? That's the reaction that the school wants in the short term. And then in the long term, while business school graduates end up scattering throughout the world, in not just physically, but they also scatter throughout the world in terms of what they do, right? They might start a sneaker company or an online education company or a hedge fund. Like there's a zillion different things that MBA graduates go on to do. But the one thing that connects all of those successful stories is tenacity and commitment, right? Hard things in life require that kind of dedication and that sort of commitment. So if somebody is the sort of person who can't hold down a job, they routinely get fired, or they get bored, or they just quit, like, oh, that job, I don't know, that was getting too stressful. I just quit that job. And then I took another job, but I didn't like that one either, and I quit that job. That's that's not the sort of person who necessarily is going to then go on and just and do great things in the future. So in your application, what does this mean? In your resume, if you have had any sort of a promotion in your resume, I want you to make sure that it's very clear that you've had that promotion. If you can, I strongly advocate, let's say you've had a promotion within a certain company, I strongly advocate stacking those titles one on top of the other to make it immediately visually clear that you started off as a junior analyst and whoop, now you're an associate or whatever the case may be. Sometimes people, to save a line or two, will put multiple titles that they've had at a company all on one line, maybe separating them with a semicolon, like I'm currently an associate from this date to this date, semicolon. Before that, I was an analyst from this date to this date, semicolon. And that, look, if you don't have any other room at all, fine. But I would rather have you sacrifice some other line of information, but convey immediately, like, boom, here, look, it's very clear to your eyeballs. Your eyeballs will notice it, and then your brain is more likely to process it, that you've had that sort of a promotion. Um, this is why also a lot of times the more elite business schools do tend to go for people who have already had more elite employers. Not a requirement, but it certainly helps because it gives them the confidence if this person has already been successful at Bain Capital, at KKR, at McKinsey, at wherever, Amazon, Microsoft, wherever, then I am confident that they are going to continue to have that sort of success in these big companies in the future. Now, if that's not you, don't panic. I'm not saying that you're doomed, but what you're then going to want to do in your application, and particularly in the resume, is I want you to focus on the transferable skills that you've gotten. So even if right now you work for no name, Maria's Donut Shop here on the corner of 47th on Times Square, which is where I am right now, and you're like, oh, I just work at a humble donut shop. That's not necessarily bad. But then in your resume, I want you to focus on what are the sorts of things I've done that will be appealing to the future employers. Because the first real stakeholder or the first real customer of an MBA program is in fact the corporate recruiting partners, right? They're the first. The MBA brings you in and they give you the skills and they give the experiential things and the classes and the whatever, and then when they catapult you out into the world, the first people who are going to be the customers of the new and improved you are going to be these corporate recruiters. So that lens, the what are our corporate recruiters going to think about this person, even if it's subconscious, that's a lens that's being used when they look at your stuff. So if you don't currently have like this shiny solid gold diamond encrusted resume, that's okay. But then try to focus on, okay, what are the sorts of things that I've already done that one of these future employers is going to like? So try to think about that when you're cutting down your resume to get it onto that one page to highlight on that. And your recommenders can vouch for you here too. So your recommenders can absolutely say things like, she is the most talented analyst I've had in 10 years at the firm, or he is going to go on to do amazing things because even though right now I work at a small donut shop, I used to work at McKinsey, and I can tell you that McKinsey, big corporate recruiters like McKinsey are going to love this guy. That's obviously an exaggerated example, but the the point is, like, you could have your recommenders also vouch for your hire ability. Hire, HIRE, not HIGHER. That these big corporate sponsors and recruiters are going to love you. And so then this brings us to the absolute pinnacle, tippy top. And this is where things really do start to separate between the very, very elite and very hard, the programs that have a 6% acceptance rate versus the programs that have a much easier acceptance rate, for example. This is the leadership potential, and this is the top of the pyramid. So this is basically asking, are you able to move mountains? In other words, are you able to make a lot of impact? And are you able to make that impact by somehow influencing other people? Because leadership always involves, on some level, influencing other people, motivating other people to do the right thing. Leadership rarely happens in a vacuum. Like, let's say you come up with this amazing invention by yourself, and you're all by yourself and you invent something. If you can't convince people to try your invention, to pay for your invention, to sell your invention, nothing's going to happen. So this is where the rubber really hits the road, of you showing them that you're the sort of person that can make good things happen within whatever context you currently find yourself, and that you can do it through other people, and that you do it in a healthy way, a sustainable, healthy way through other people. Not that you shout at everyone and threaten to fire them. And so then in the short term, they do what you say, but in the long term, they resent you and they all quit. That's not what they want. They don't want, again, thinking ahead to them thinking about you 20, 30 years. They don't want you to be the person on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal where it's like everyone on their team quit because they cited a toxic work environment, right? That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing for the school if you go out to become the person who's like the toxic work environment person, or the sexual harassment person, or the very bigoted and prejudiced person who doesn't give a fair chance to everyone. So this is why it's so important for you to show that you're able to help people and groups achieve great things together, but you also do it in a healthy and kind way. At the very minimum, that you're ethical and you won't end up in jail, hopefully. So the essays, you might have noticed before, like, wait a minute, she's talking about the recommendation, she's talking about the resume, test score. She hasn't really talked about the essays. And the essays are like the big thing that everyone talks about. The essays, essays, essays. Why hasn't she talked about the essays yet? Because the essays, here in the essays, is the main place where you are really going to be able to not only talk about the accomplishment itself can go on the resume, but the essay is where you talk about how you achieve that accomplishment. And that's where you can highlight things like how you were able to get people to agree to what you wanted to do, but in a healthy, mature way, not a threatening, toxic way. And therefore, if that's the sort of person you are today, hopefully that's the person you'll be in the future. And your recommenders, again, can also vouch for you here. They can say, like, oh my gosh, he was able to convince the SVP to do this thing. We had never done that before. And no one ever convinces the SVP of anything, but he was able to do it. And because he was able to do it, good things happened. That's the sort of thing that you are going to want to really focus the essays on, that leadership portion. Because the good news is, because it is a holistic process, we've got all those other sections. That's where you can focus on the other aspects of the pyramid. You can pepper them throughout the other parts. Just as a side note, I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com. I'm a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I started giving people admissions advice in 2003 as a student volunteering with the admissions office. So I am currently entering my 20th year of admissions, and I have put everything I know into the step-by-step online process at ApplicantLab.com, and it costs $349. It's all the same steps and all the same advice that I would walk you through if I were working with you side by side, but because it's online and it's digital, I can scale it and I don't have to charge you $5,000 or $10,000 or more. Because by the way, the cost of Applicant Lab at $349 is actually less than what people like me with of my caliber can charge for just 1 hour of their time. Other people of my caliber on the market right now are charging $450 to $500 plus for 1 hour of their time. 1 hour, only 1 hour. So for 350, you get all of Maria's knowledge, and there's also email support included. So if there's like, oh, something's missing, I don't know that I still have, don't worry, email us and we will get back to you. So to summarize, what are the admissions people looking for, and where in your application do you prove it? The academics are proven primarily through your test scores. The fact that you are a good person that other people get along with, you're not walking around, knocking old ladies over on the street. That stuff comes through primarily through the recommendations. And then anything in your past that has involved maybe building bridges or getting teams to work together, that's something you can mention quickly in the resume. Um, are you someone who is going to have a successful career in the future in terms of your ability to hold down a job and keep a job and not embarrass us as a school? Well, your previous job history is going to be a big pointer towards that. So you're going to want to highlight that in your resume. And again, the recommendations can also say like, oh, well, this person's going on is going to go on to stumble over their words in a GMAT club. No, this person is going to go on to accomplish great things. And then finally, at the very tippy top, the leadership potential. This is where you are going to explain to them how you accomplish certain things or why you did certain things. And that's going to really dig into who you are as a person and as a leader who can influence others. And that's where you're going to convey most of that, because your recommender can't really say, well, here's what she was thinking in that moment, right? But you can say in the essay, at that moment, I realized that this person was feeling left out. So that's why I decided to reach out to them, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my tips. I think, I can't remember if I was supposed to finish at 11:40 or 11:50, but okay. Oh, I'm back. So I'm not sure if let me see. So, Abhijit, if you can just text me and let me know if or chat with me and let me know if I'm supposed to end now. If I'm supposed to end now, I'll end now. And if I'm not supposed to end now, then I can just start taking um, some questions. So let me just quickly try to skim some of the questions, and then I'm just quickly just taking a quick look. Okay. So it's some of the questions I'm going to try to hit the questions that I think are of most use to most people. So someone asked, can you please elaborate on the letters of recommendation? Should they all be from the workplace, or should some of them be from people we know personally? These people are known, very well known, but aren't from my workspace. So Shruti is asking this question. So first of all, most schools will flat out tell you that they want a letter of recommendation at a minimum from your workspace, ideally from your current supervisor. So the schools are pretty specific. Ideally, what they are looking for is a letter from your current boss or supervisor. Because first of all, your current boss is going to know you very well, right? Because they work with you day in, day out. And so they see how you do things. They see you accomplishing things. They see how do you get others to work with you. So that's like the main thing that they're looking for, is not just from your workplace. Yes, it does. You have to have at least one recommendation from your workplace because it's business school after all, right? That professional impact is really important. So it has to be from your workspace, has to be from a current boss. Now, in some cases, it's not possible to get your current boss to be your recommender. No problem. In that case, you get someone who is still senior to you, but then you can explain the situation elsewhere in the application. There's like this thing called like the optional essay, or some schools will even say, if your current supervisor is not your recommender, please explain the circumstances here. So you will then say, look, my current boss hates MBA programs, thinks they're a waste of time and money. So I can't tell them that I'm applying. Or look, I'm at the end of a 2-year promotion cycle. I'm about to get promoted, but if my boss knows I'm leaving, they're going to be like, why am I going to give this person the promotion? So you can explain that. But the person will still need to be someone who is senior to you at your work, not a peer, ideally. And why is that? Because if it's somebody who is a peer or somebody who works for you, that might call into question, is this recommendation really a truthful one? Or is it being given under duress? That is to say, I might have a friend that I think is a great person, but I might not think that they're a very good business person. I think they're a great person in other facets of being a person. But if they say, "Hey, Maria, I want you to write a recommendation for me," I might feel pressured to kind of lie a little or kind of gloss over because I'm like, "Oh, but they're my friend. They're my friend." Or if it's someone who works for you, "Oh, it's my boss. Oh, if I write this letter and they don't get into business school, they're going to blame me. So I'm going to just focus on only the positive." The reason it has to come from someone who owes you nothing is that way it helps me as a reader feel comfortable that this is someone who is completely unbiased, and that when I ask them about like what is this person's weaknesses or what's some critical feedback you've given this person, I know that I'm getting something that is at least somewhat legitimate, right? If you say, well, the only critical feedback I've ever given them is that they need to stop being so perfect, like, ooh, it's gonna call into question. So it does need to be people who know you from work. Now, some schools do allow you, many schools will have you, you can have two recommendations. In that case, if most of your leadership impact has in fact come from a nonprofit or community sphere, in that case, then I would have that person, your supervisor from that activity, be your second recommender because then they can talk about you being a leader, but in a different sphere. But if you're just volunteering and like, hey, you're doing a nice job volunteering, but you're not really like, you're not really a superstar in the nonprofit, then that recommendation letter might not add a whole lot. So ideally, they will be from people who know you professionally. And Shruti, one final sort of comment I'll add here is you said these are people who are very well known. Please realize that these admissions officers are sitting in their little offices in Hanover, New Hampshire, or Washington, D.C., or, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. They might be very well known to you, whoever it is you're thinking about, but they're probably not well known to the admissions office. Unless if it is in fact Jamie Dimon or Mike Bloomberg. But in that case, I would say to you, but if Mike Bloomberg doesn't know how good of a leader you are, how's he going to fill out that letter for you, right? Because it's not just a letter. To be clear, the recommendation asks very specific questions. It doesn't just say, "Tell us how great this person is." They actually say, "How does this person compare against their peers? What's some critical feedback you've given them, and how did they respond?" So the quote unquote letter of recommendation is actually mini essays that your recommender needs to write. So if that person that you're thinking of cannot answer those questions truthfully, then you need to uh, move on, move on, and think of somebody else to be your recommender. Uh, let's see. Someone's asking if you have equivalent scores, if you have a GMAT from a couple of years ago um, versus a GMAT that's more recent, which one? It doesn't matter. I don't think it matters how recent it is. Okay. Going back to recommenders, I've just changed my company and my new manager might not get to know me on a professional level. Can a previous manager work? Yes, Varun. You can use a previous manager. That's fine. What you'll do then is you'll just explain in that little section that I mentioned before. You'll just say, "Hey, God, I have a new boss. She hasn't gotten to know me that well yet, but this previous boss." And then by the way, in the recommendation, I just said it's kind of like little mini essays that they need to write. That's one of the first questions is how do you know this applicant? How long have you known them? In what context have you known them? So also that previous boss can then say, like, "Oh, Varun, I worked for me for 3 years, and now we don't work together anymore, but I know him really well." So don't worry about that. Someone's asking, "I have my own business and I don't have any supervisors. What can you do for a letter of recommendation?" So, Kaushal, if you think about what I was saying before about people who are not beholden to you, think about people who, for example, if somebody sells something into your business, oh, thank you. Thanks for pulling them up. If somebody sells something into your business, they are beholden to you. So any suppliers into your business are, hey, look, if you've got nothing else, go with them. But suppliers into your business are not going to be as powerful as say a customer of your business because a customer of your business, they don't owe you anything. In fact, they're probably paying you for your services or the goods that you provide. And so if they then say, well, Costco's been great, let's say you sell Advil for headaches, right? You've got a whole little distribution business for Advil. And I'm like, look, I have had 7 different people that I have bought Advil from in the past, but man, Kaushal, let me tell you how Kaushal like knocks it out of the park. He's the nicest, he's the best. He innovated this new little tiny tube of Advil. Such a good idea. That person is going to have a lot more sway. Maybe if you have any investors as well, those could also be great people for you to think about. Okay, let me see. Let me look at the time. Oh, I've got about 2 more minutes. Okay, Amy's asking, what about people who have gotten impacted by tech layoffs? How should you best recover from potential resume gaps? So, Amy, the good news is the tech layoffs, like everyone knows about them. And so, in the past, if a small company here or there might do an isolated layoff, I might look at that and say, ooh, like was Amy laid off because, it was part of just a general restructuring and it had nothing to do with her? Or was it, was she really the problem here? The good news is with the current mass layoffs that are happening, to the extent that mass layoffs can be good news. But the good news is that it's becoming so common that it's not going to be held against you the way it might have been held against you several years ago. What I would do is, first of all, number one, if you can get a previous boss from your previous company to say in their recommendation something like, oh man, I was Amy's boss for 2 years, and I was devastated when I heard that we were laying her. I was just so, because she is such a star, right? So then that way your recommender can come out and be like, it wasn't her, she's great. It was the company that made that decision on a bigger scale. And then the other thing I would tell you is if you are currently in a resume gap phase of your life, which means if you're currently unemployed, try to find something productive to do with that time. Um, the easiest things to do would be see if you can find like a startup that you can consult to, even if they don't really pay you or can't pay you a whole lot. It's at least showing that you're someone who's like a go-getter and you're someone who does things. And or if your reason for going to business school involves some sort of a career pivot, now could be a great time for you to try to start networking with people in that future field and see if you can get like an unpaid internship in, let's say, something like venture capital, right? So let's say you're interested in venture capital and that's why you want to go to business school, but you don't have any image. Well, maybe now's the time to reach out to venture capitalists and be like, hey, I'm currently unemployed. Like, do you need free help? So at least that way, you're not only continuing to get some sort of relevant experience in general, but when you then get to business school, I then feel more comfortable as an admissions reader that, oh, well, Amy says she wants to go to venture capital or whatever it is. I feel more now that she's starting to get some of that experience. I know that my recruiters are going to be like, oh, she already has 3 months before she even enrolled, before she already had some of that experience. That's great. See what I'm saying? So if you are currently in between jobs, don't just sort of sit back. Um, not that you are, but do try to do productive things that will help continue to bolster your resume, even if it means perhaps the compensation isn't quite there, but at least you are continuing to grow. This could be a great time to develop a new skill. If you want to learn a little bit more about marketing, maybe you can try to find a startup or a nonprofit that needs that kind of help. Because the good thing about nonprofits, et cetera, is that they don't have a lot of money. And so if you're willing to put in good work and make it affordable for them, then they are probably going to appreciate you. And maybe that person could end up becoming a recommender. Who knows? So that is my advice. I am 1 minute over. So I'm going to take off, but I think I'm doing an additional Zoom Q&A starting in a few minutes. GMAT Club posted the link in the comments. So if you want to continue the conversation over there, jump in and join me there. But otherwise, please check out my product. If you liked my session today and you like how I explain things, et cetera, then you're going to love Applicant Lab because it's just a lot of that. So I would love to be a part of your admissions journey, whether you use Applicant Lab by itself or whether you use it in conjunction with someone on my team or some other admissions consultant. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife that you can use in lots of different ways to help you. But please do check us out. And yeah, I'll see you perhaps in the Zoom in a few minutes. Thank you so much.